This case is one of the most horrific cases I ever heard. This is a 14-year-old that was murdered, raped, had her hands cut off, and her throat almost cut off. This is an absolute animal that came into our town.
On March 24th, investigators entered an abandoned house in East Toledo to follow up on a lead in a missing child case. The building had been vacant for years, damaged by a fire no one had ever fully explained. But that morning, officers moved carefully through the structure, and within minutes they requested additional units. Something inside required the coroner. Word reached the crowd gathering outside long before officials confirmed anything. A young girl had been found in the upstairs portion of the house, and people quietly asked whether it might be the 13-year-old who had been missing for nearly a week. Her family had been pleading for information, her school had reported her absence, and volunteers had spent days handing out flyers. And the last person who publicly said he saw her last, her father, was no longer in Toledo. He had been on television earlier that week describing himself as a worried parent. But by the time her body was discovered, police were already searching for him. The questions that followed were straightforward but impossible to ignore. How did a missing child investigation lead officers to an abandoned house? Why were there inconsistencies in the accounts given earlier? And how did the person who appeared on camera asking for help become the focus of a statewide manhunt? This is the case of Kei'Mani Latigue, a case still unfolding, still under investigation, and still raising questions about what happened in the days before she was found. But before we begin, if you find this video interesting, please give it a like at the end and tell me what you think about the case. It really helps the channel. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more. Thank you. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse, glorify, or condone any of the criminal actions or individuals described in this case. Viewer discretion is advised. Before the search teams walked the streets of Toledo, and before the police put out a statewide alert, Kei'Mani Latigue was simply a 13-year-old girl trying to grow up in a life that had never been straightforward. She was born on March 28, 2011 in Ohio, to Darnell Jones and Tiara Caston, and the two were already living separate lives when she came into the world. And her custody was never a clean line that anyone could easily trace. From the beginning, Kaymani's life was divided between adults who loved her but struggled to create a stable place where she could stay for long. When she was still a baby, she lived with her mother's godmother, a woman who stepped in before Kaymani was even a year old. This godmother helped raise her, helped provide for her, and continued doing so even years later. But as Kaymani grew, things changed, and around 2019 or 2020, she moved in with her grandmother Dorothy Latigue in Toledo. Dorothy took on the responsibility of raising her, even though the legal paperwork confirming guardianship didn't come until 2024, long after Dorothy had already been doing the work. Life with Dorothy wasn't perfect, but it was the place Kaymani called home. They lived with 2 dogs, and the house was the kind of home where a child learned early what to do when the adults had long shifts and weren't always around when school ended. Dorothy worked demanding hours, so Kaymani became what people often call a latchkey kid. She had her own set of keys, she carried a phone, and she followed a routine that she rarely broke. She went straight home after school, checked in, and stayed inside unless she asked for permission to go elsewhere. Even at 13, she carried herself with a sense of responsibility that made adults trust her. At Spring Elementary School, where she was a 7th grader, the staff saw a side of her that didn't always show up at home. Teachers said she was an honor roll student who tried hard in every class, and she was weeks away from receiving a kindness award. She greeted her teacher with a hug every morning, and she shared her breakfast without being asked. She helped other students who didn't understand their assignments, and she did it without making anyone feel embarrassed. People who knew her at school didn't talk about her in vague, polite terms. They said she was warm, thoughtful, and genuinely good. She liked older music, the kind her grandmother played around the house. She loved Ms. Pac-Man, often leaning into the arcade machine with a kind of competitive joy, and she also played basketball and football. When Dorothy had visitors, Kaymani naturally drifted toward the younger children, keeping them entertained and laughing. Kaymani's 14th birthday was just days away, and she told Dorothy that she wanted a basketball-themed party. She was thinking about decorations and colors and how everything would look, and she had every reason to believe she would be there to celebrate it. But while she was picturing balloons, jerseys, and cake, her life was moving towards something she didn't see coming. On Saturday, March 15th, Kaymani spent the day with her mother, Tiara Caston, and that visit began when Darnell Jones dropped her off in front of Tiara's home. Tiara later said that Dorothy, the grandmother raising Kaymani, had given him permission to bring her by, and there was nothing unusual about that arrangement. They were a complicated family, but they still tried to make space for moments that felt simple and familiar. Tiara remembered that day clearly because it had been one of the rare times she had her daughter all to herself, and she described it as a peaceful afternoon filled with laughter, video games, and the kind of closeness she had missed. And after that visit, Kaymani went back to Dorothy's house. Sunday, March 16th began like any other day in their routine, but that night something happened. Late in the evening, Kaymani called her father, and Darnell later told reporters that she sounded frightened. According to him, she said she thought someone was trying to break into the house, and she didn't want to be alone. It was the kind of call no parent ignores, so he said he got in the car, picked up his cousin, and they drove to Dorothy's neighborhood in Toledo to check on her. Darnell's version of the night remained consistent when he spoke on camera. He said he and his cousin stayed with Kaymani till about 12:30 in the morning, believing she was calm enough to handle the night, especially since she was used to being home alone when Dorothy worked long shifts. That was the story he told the media, the police, and anyone who asked where he had been. But phone records later added details that didn't fit neatly into the picture he painted. Kaymani's phone showed a call to Darnell at 1:29 a.m., a call he said he missed, and after that, she called his girlfriend several more times. The timing suggested she had still been trying to reach someone even after he claimed he had reassured her and left. And by the time Monday morning came, the girl who always went straight home and always showed up for school suddenly wasn't anywhere. When Dorothy Latigue came home on Monday morning, she expected to walk into the same quiet routine she had lived with for years. She had worked an early shift and the house should have been locked the way she left it, with Kaymani getting ready for school or already on her way. But the moment she stepped onto the porch, she felt something was wrong. The front door was unlocked, hanging open in a way that seemed strange, because Kaymani never left that door open, not even once. She pushed the door the rest of the way and immediately saw that the house wasn't just unlocked. It was in complete disarray and nothing about it felt familiar. Dorothy walked through the living room, trying to understand what she was looking at, and the first thing she noticed was the gas stove, turned on without a flame. The house felt like someone had left in a hurry or like someone had been interrupted before they could finish whatever they were doing. She moved farther into the living room and saw Kaymani's glasses lying beside the couch. That struck her hard because Kaymani needed her glasses for most activities, and near the glasses were her underwear, and the confusion only deepened when she saw Kaymani's pajamas on the dining room floor, tossed aside. Her keys were still inside too, and that was the moment Dorothy's worry turned into fear, because Kaymani would never walk out of the house without them. She called out her name and walked through every room, but the house stayed quiet in a way that felt wrong. She grabbed her phone and dialed Kaymani's number. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. She tried again, and the same thing happened. So she did what any guardian would do in that moment. She called 911. But before police even reached the house, Dorothy called the school. The secretary checked the attendance records and told her that Kaymani had never arrived that morning, which was very unusual because Kaymani always showed up. When officers arrived, Dorothy filed the report, and that made it official. Kei'Mani Latigue was a missing child. Her information went out to patrol units, to surrounding jurisdictions, and eventually to state databases. The next day, Dorothy stood in front of a television camera and tried to explain the scene she had walked into. She believed that the more people understood about that morning, the more likely they were to recognize that something terrible had already happened. Before the police ever filed a missing person report, Kei'Mani Latigue had already tried to tell the adults around her that something in her life wasn't right, and her school happened to be one of the only places where she felt comfortable enough to speak. Kaymani told her teachers that she didn't feel safe at home, and this wasn't the kind of claim a teacher takes lightly, especially when it comes from a child who rarely complained about anything. Her teacher, Karen Harabedian, noticed more than words. She saw the way Kaymani held herself at the end of the school day, and she saw the fear that would show up in her eyes when it was time to pack up. Karen saw too, and she couldn't dismiss them as normal childhood scrapes because they didn't match the way Kaymani played or the way she carried herself at school. Because teachers in Ohio are mandatory reporters, Karen called Lucas County Children's Services, also known as LCCS, more than once, and she wasn't the only one. Other staff members called too, including the school bus driver, who had seen enough to be worried. Their reports weren't vague. They were specific concerns about a child who was showing signs of fear and possible harm. There were other concerns as well. During one of the CPS assessments, Dorothy said that she sometimes used physical discipline and that admission should have mattered. But when CPS spoke to Kaymani alone, she told them she felt safe at home with Dorothy. Children often minimize what they experience, especially when they don't know what will happen if they tell the whole truth. So, the caseworkers noted the conflicting information, and they documented the visit, and then they moved on. And even outside the official interviews, there were more signs. One of Kaymani's classmates remembered her coming to school with on her arms and saying that she and her grandmother had been fighting. To another child, that might have sounded like a normal household argument, but adults knew better. Fear and repeated comments about not feeling safe should have been enough to trigger intervention. But the system didn't move quickly, and the pattern kept building. LCCS later confirmed that they had received at least 3 separate reports about Kaymani, one in December 2023 and 2 more in March 2024. And when they reviewed the situation, they concluded that there wasn't enough evidence to remove her from the home. Instead, they gave Dorothy guidance about appropriate discipline and closed the case. And that was why, when news spread that Kaymani was missing, her teachers said they felt a familiar kind of shock. They weren't surprised that something bad had happened. They were only surprised it had gone this far. On March 21st, the community organized a search party, and volunteers from the neighborhood, nearby towns, and surrounding counties showed up with flyers, flashlights, and the kind of determination that only appears when a child is missing. People walked through parks, alleys, abandoned lots, and wooded paths, and they stopped cars at intersections to hand out pictures of a 13-year-old girl whose smile they hoped someone recognized. Strangers who had never met her stepped into the search as if she belonged to all of them, because they understood that children don't simply disappear without someone noticing. While the search groups moved across the city, Tiara Caston Kaymani's mother was collapsing under the weight of fear no parent imagined they would ever feel. She held up the flyer with shaking hands and begged people to share her daughter's face, repeating that she just needed one person to see the photo and say they recognized the child.
I have not ate in 3 days. We need all the support we can get from anybody. We don't care who it is. Please just come out and help us find my niece.
The next day, Sunday, March 23rd, a felony abduction charge filed against Darnell Jones. Jones is Kaymani's dad, and court records show he was the last person with her before she went missing.
This man has been to my house several times. He usually takes her for weekends to his house to visit with him and his other children, and I feel deceived. Like, you played for so long in my face, like you was her dad, like you really had her best interests at heart. But where is she?
If my baby don't make it home, I will never be okay again. And I hate to say that because I have other kids.
From the beginning, law enforcement did not treat this as a runaway case because nothing about the scene supported that possibility. The trashed house, the unlocked door, the glasses, the keys, the stove, all pointed in one direction. Kaymani was responsible, predictable, and deeply anchored in routines. She never broke those patterns, so detectives quickly leaned toward abduction, and the case escalated in urgency within hours. And while officers canvassed neighborhoods and interviewed anyone who might have seen or heard something, one detail kept rising to the surface. Darnell Jones had been the last confirmed person to see her. Investigators took note of that immediately, and as they sat with him for formal interviews, they started noticing that some details of his story shifted depending on how the questions were asked. He repeated the broad outline, but the small things, the timing, the sequence, the calls, didn't always line up in the same way. Detectives compared his statements to phone records, to Dorothy's account, and to the physical evidence inside the house, and each time they did, the inconsistencies widened. But long before detectives began comparing Darnell Jones's timelines to phone records, his name had already appeared in court files and police databases across Ohio. His history stretched back to his late teens, and it showed a pattern that was impossible to ignore once investigators pulled the documents. He had been arrested for drunk and disorderly conduct several times when he was still very young, and those early charges led to frequent court appearances where judges warned him to change his behavior. But he moved through those years without much stability, and the pattern continued into adulthood, creating a long trail of cases that painted a consistent picture of turmoil. One of the most significant early turning points was an arson case where he was accused of setting fire to a building. Instead of going to trial, he entered an Alford plea to attempted arson, which allowed him to maintain his claim of innocence, while acknowledging that the evidence against him was strong enough for a conviction. As part of his supervision, the court required him to attend treatment, keep a job, and work toward earning his GED. And for a while, he appeared to follow those conditions. But that period of compliance didn't last. By 2015, Darnell had become tied to more serious violence. According to police records, he fired a gun at a man at the Greenbelt Place apartments, then fled the scene before officers arrived. When he was eventually arrested, the court placed him under community control, but he violated those conditions several times. Each violation added new layers of supervision, extensions, and warnings, yet the behavior never shifted for long, and the cycle repeated itself again and again. There was also the incident where he struck a man with an alternator during an argument. It was so severe the victim required medical treatment, and Darnell was charged with felonious assault, a charge that carried serious consequences, even with a plea. He received probation and conditions he was expected to follow, but the violations continued, and his record accumulated more drunk and disorderly charges alongside the existing assault cases. The combination of alcohol, anger, and impulsive decisions kept showing up in his files, each incident reinforcing the same underlying pattern. His history also included DV, particularly a case involving his wife Antonia in 2019. Police reports documented an argument where he became physically aggressive, and neighbors later told officers they heard objects being thrown and saw him toss a television set off a balcony during the dispute. He eventually pled guilty to domestic violence, yet even with that conviction, the pattern didn't break. Each case added to the concerns surrounding his temper, especially when alcohol was involved. On top of those incidents were several cases tied to weapons, even though he was legally barred from owning firearms as a convicted felon. At one point, he was shot in the chest during a trespassing dispute, and instead of stepping away from dangerous situations, he was later found by police in a daycare parking lot, intoxicated and holding a gun. That arrest led to weapons charges and a plea agreement that sent him to prison for a year. When he finished his sentence, he entered post-release supervision, but the concerns about access to guns and volatile behavior were never fully resolved. Across the years, the pattern stayed remarkably consistent. Court documents described a man who struggled with intoxication, reacted with violence when angry, and repeatedly placed himself in situations that involved weapons, even when he was legally prohibited from having them. And as investigators reviewed those records during the search for Kaymani, they realized that this long history had never been part of any child welfare discussion involving her. While the search for Kaymani intensified across Toledo, Darnell had been spending most of his time at a small house on Willard Street, where he lived on and off with his girlfriend, Nina Turner, and their young child. Nina had been noticing small changes in his behavior long before police considered him a suspect, and those changes lingered in her mind in ways she couldn't ignore. After the incident happened, he had told her to turn off the security camera at her apartment, but she didn't comply. She also noticed the way he avoided eye contact when she asked what was going on. Something else unsettled her. A family member mentioned seeing Darnell slip something beneath the basement staircase, and one afternoon, when Darnell wasn't home, Nina went to the basement and opened the small closet under the stairs. Inside, she found muddy work boots and a rolled-up rubber cargo mat, the kind used to protect the back seat of a car when the seats are folded down. She knew immediately that something was wrong because he hadn't been working, and he never used those boots for anything not recently, not for months. So the mud on them didn't make sense, and neither did the way he had tried to hide them. Then she made the decision to call the detectives who had been canvassing neighborhoods and asked them to come to the house. When they arrived, she handed over the boots and the cargo mat without hesitation. Later, when Darnell returned and realized the items were gone, he didn't confront her or demand an explanation. Instead, he simply left the house and never came back.
The thing about it is because before they even showed up, he asked me to turn my cameras off. I have cameras in my house, and he asked me to turn them off. And I was like, why would you want me to turn the cameras off? He said, because I didn't come home till 5 o'clock that morning. And he didn't want them to suspect anything because he didn't show up till 5. And I'm like, well, thinking in my head, I'm like, well, if you don't have anything to hide, then why should I turn the cameras off? And I didn't, but he thought I did.
She and Jones have a 2-year-old daughter together. She says she was in the room when Jones tried to hide evidence connected to the case in her house.
After the police took us downtown and questioned us, I came back home before he did, and my family that was here informed me that he hid something under my stairs in my basement. So I called the detectives, and they came and did a search warrant and grabbed it. And once he noticed those were gone, that was the last time I seen him.
Police executed a search warrant. What did he hide under your stairs?
It was like a mat for the back of your truck, not a pickup, but SUV. You know, when you lay your seats down and you put that rubber mat in there to protect the back of your seats in case you're hauling something. That's what he rolled up and put in my basement. And his work boots, which were caked with mud. I never seen him put it under there, but I wasn't about to hold no evidence for him or none of that. He must have thought that.
Jones went on the run to Columbus, where he used to live.
After the search warrant and he disappeared, we left the house because I was scared that he might come back and harm one of us.
That silence frightened her more than any argument could have, so she packed what she could, gathered her daughter, and moved to a different location because she didn't know what he might do once he realized she had spoken to investigators. Days later, after she settled into her new home, he called her from a number traced back to Columbus, and she gave that information to the police too because she understood that withholding details was no longer an option. However, on March 24th, a building that had been standing on Chase Street long after it should have disappeared from the neighborhood became the center of everything. People in East Toledo had complained about it for almost 2 years because it felt like a place where trouble lingered. A fire had torn through its second floor back in May 2022, and firefighters never figured out what caused it, so the city marked the structure as unsafe and left a notice saying it was a public nuisance that needed to be demolished. In the early hours of the day, investigators lined the road and neighbors stepped outside one by one when they saw police tape, lights, and officers gathering near the front porch. And the longer the investigators stayed inside, the more residents walked toward the house, hoping for answers, but fearing what those answers might be. Tiara was among them, and she stood in the crowd with her hands shaking because no one would tell her anything.
You know, if it's my baby, they still not telling me nothing. It takes nothing. It's nothing to take a picture. It's nothing to, you know what I'm saying, let me know when the coroner's bringing her out so I can see if that's indeed my baby. Y'all not saying nothing. And y'all can tell if it's a grown woman or if it's a little kid. My daughter tall, but she still has the body of a child. You know the difference.
So what are they telling you?
They're not telling me nothing. They ain't told me nothing. Not a word. Then they talking about it might be days before I be able to identify my child. Like, no.
Inside the house, investigators found the body of a teenage girl, but they didn't announce anything right away because they needed the coroner, and they needed the confirmation to be official. But word started spreading through the street before anyone came out to speak. People tried to read the expressions of the officers as they moved in and out of the doorway, and each minute made the truth harder to deny. And finally, the confirmation came. The coroner identified the girl as 13-year-old Kei'Mani Latigue, and the cause of death was ruled a homicide from injuries that no child should ever have suffered. Tiara collapsed when she heard it. She fell to her knees in front of strangers who tried to steady her, while she cried out for a daughter she'd been begging people to help find. Officers formed a wall around her when the crowd surged forward, and for a moment, Chase Street was filled with people crying, praying, and trying to make sense of the cruelty that had reached into a child's life and taken it away. Later that day, the mayor addressed the city and said it was one of the worst cases Toledo had ever faced, and the police chief admitted that even after 3 decades on the force, the cruelty of what they had just uncovered still stunned him. In the hours after Kaymani's body was identified, the grief inside Toledo spilled into the streets, and it did so fast. People gathered outside Dorothy Latigue's house within minutes of the news spreading, and what started as whispered anger quickly grew into shouting because rumors moved faster than facts. Some believed she had failed to protect her granddaughter, and others believed she knew more than she was saying, and those assumptions turned into threats. Dorothy wasn't even home yet when neighbors called her to warn her not to come back because a crowd was waiting outside, and some people were talking about harming her. She later said she heard someone threaten to blow up her house and others saying they would deal with her once she walked through the door.
My first question for you, yesterday lots of things was going on. We want to know specifically at your home, there was a lot of speculation online that you were being arrested, but when we checked with police, that was not the case. So can you further clarify on exactly what did happen yesterday at your home?
Well, I was called and told that there was a mob of people in front of my house. They were angry. It was more or less the people that were here earlier waiting to see if it was Kei'Mani that was in the home. And basically some people from the neighborhood had contacted me and said that there was a mob in front of my house and they were talking about what they were going to do to me once I came home. So the police, the detective said that she would have a unit come out and help me get my things and more or less escort me off the property. I asked to be handcuffed just so they can get the away from my property.
Are you scared?
So no, I was never arrested. I was taken downtown, but I was never arrested.
Are you scared for your safety right now?
I am.
What are some of the things that you've been hearing and receiving from people?
They said they was gonna blow up my house. They said they was gonna do harm to me. It's just been a barrage of different things that they've been stating.
The fear in those messages was enough for police to act. The next night, the city held a large candlelight vigil for Kaymani. Teachers, parents, friends, neighbors, and people who had never met her gathered under the same sky because the story had spread through the city. They held candles, prayed, and stood quietly in front of posters showing the girl who smiled in every school picture she ever took. But even while the city mourned openly and demanded accountability, the man who insisted he had done nothing but try to protect his daughter was already gone. He was on the run. When Toledo issued the statewide BOLO for Darnell Jones, it moved fast because detectives already believed he had left the city. His name, his alias, the vehicle linked to him, and his photographs were sent to departments across Ohio. The strongest lead came from someone who had already risked her safety once, Nina Turner, who told investigators that the number he used after disappearing traced back to Columbus. So the search shifted 2 hours south, and officers there started watching for movement around places connected to that phone. The break came when a vehicle tied to him was spotted, and SWAT units closed in before he had the chance to slip away again. When they found him, he was outside, and it was clear he had tried to change his appearance because his hair had been shaved close to the scalp. And instead of panic or surprise, officers saw something else. He looked calm in a way that didn't match the chaos surrounding the case. The team kept their distance as they moved into position because one wrong move could shift everything. They ordered him again to put his hands up, and he answered by telling them to just kill him over and over, as if he had already made his peace with whatever happened next. And even then, he kept one hand buried inside his pocket, which forced the officers to repeat their commands as they watched his shoulders tense just enough to signal movement. Then he pulled out a gun. The standoff ended in seconds, shots rang out, and when they struck him, he fell, but continued insisting he didn't want to live anymore.
What's your name? Kill me.
Dude, show me your fucking hands right now.
Me, bro.
Pull your fucking hand out of your... I swear to God, pull your...
Shots fired. Shots fired. Dennis in a second. Get medic, go.
Don't fucking move.
Don't move. Alright, suspect down. All you guys are okay.
Don't move. He's got 33 right there.
33 in his hands.
No, it's a walkie-talkie, but there's 33s right here. Don't you move or you're gonna get shot, okay? All right? Got it. Yep. That's him. Somebody get
on the main air. Get us a medic.
I'm working on it.
All right, on your belly. All right. I got cuffs. There you go. Thank you, brother. We'll get you help, okay?
I just want to die, bro.
No, I know, but we can't allow that.
I can't.
All right.
I don't want to live.
Get us some cruisers. Secure this scene.
Copy, I'm installing radio.
All right, who fired?
him in the car.
He did too.
All right. You did? I did not. Okay.
He did.
Okay. You good?
All right.
You good? All right.
I know.
All right.
Listen to me. Listen to me. I gotta roll you off. I gotta get you up on your side, okay? I gotta get you up on your side. I got you.
All right. Where you hit at, bro?
I don't know. All in my leg.
All in your leg.
He's all hit right here.
I know. He's hitting his arm once.
Oh my God. Need a medic here now. Where's that?
He was transported to Wexner Medical Center in Columbus, guarded, stabilized, and prepared for surgery. And while doctors worked on him, prosecutors updated the list of charges he now faced. He was already wanted for abduction, and now investigators had linked him to the murder of his 13-year-old daughter. Additional charges followed from the confrontation itself. After Kaymani's death, the spotlight didn't stay on the suspect alone. It widened and turned toward Lucas County Children's Services, and residents treated the agency not as a side note in the tragedy, but as a central figure that now had to answer hard questions. And people who had followed Keimani's story from the moment she disappeared wanted to understand how so many warnings had been filed without any significant action taken. LCCS confirmed that they had received multiple reports about Keimani over the previous months, including concerns about discipline and emotional safety. Yet none of those calls led to her being removed or placed in temporary care. And while they had spoken with her alone and believed she felt safe in Dorothy's home, residents argued that the agency missed a pattern that had been obvious to teachers who saw her almost every day. Inside the agency, caseworkers painted a picture of a system stretched far beyond its limits. They described what Mondays looked like: 17 or 18 new intakes waiting to be assigned before they even logged into their computers, and units that were supposed to have 5 workers operating with only 2. The emotional toll was heavy, the hours were long, and turnover was so common that new workers often lasted only a short time before the pressure pushed them out. Every resignation meant fewer hands to manage rising caseloads, and that meant more delays, more cracks, and more children whose cases didn't get the attention they deserved. Some professionals argued that the very structure of the hiring process was partly to blame. Audrey Haroon, who managed a youth group home, said the agency's requirement that caseworkers hold bachelor's degrees in social work or related fields shut out people who had lived through foster care or child welfare themselves and who might have recognized danger signs more quickly. She believed that some of the best potential caseworkers were being filtered out before they could even apply, because they didn't meet a credential requirement that didn't always reflect real-world skill. The backlash grew strong enough that county commissioners decided they needed an independent review from outside the agency. They proposed a citizens task force, and within 24 hours, more than 30 people applied. By the time the deadline passed, over 200 applications were waiting to be reviewed. Applicants needed to meet at least one of several criteria: lived experience in the system, professional experience with child welfare, backgrounds in safety or criminal justice, status as a mandatory reporter, or recognized community leadership. The conversation in Toledo shifted from grief to reform, and Keimani's name appeared in discussions not only about her life and loss, but also about the structural weaknesses that needed to be repaired. And as painful as that shift was, many believed that if the system finally changed, it would be because the city refused to let her memory disappear into a file. Once Darnell Jones was stabilized at Wexner Medical Center and formally booked, the legal system moved quickly. A Lucas County grand jury returned an indictment that stretched across 15 separate counts, and the list showed how far-reaching the case had become. He faced charges for kidnapping, multiple offenses, evidence tampering, assaulting officers, and aggravated murder. And because of the severity of those charges, prosecutors confirmed that his case qualified as Ohio's first death penalty case in more than a decade, which immediately placed it under intense public scrutiny. Court records showed that at one point he admitted to being involved, but when he stood before the judge, he entered a not guilty plea. And under the law, he remained presumed innocent unless the state proved otherwise. His defense team were 2 attorneys assigned to represent him in what would inevitably be a long and complicated case. Bond became the first major battle. Initially, Darnell was held on a $4 million bond, a number high enough to reflect the severity of the allegations. But prosecutors argued that even that amount wasn't enough, and they pushed for the court to remove Bond entirely so he wouldn't have the chance to be released. The defense asked for time to reconsider a fair amount, but Judge Goulding sided with the state. So Darnell remained in custody without bond, which meant he would stay in jail until trial. During his early court appearances, he wore what the public quickly recognized as a turtle suit, the green, thick, suicide prevention garment issued to inmates who were considered at risk of harming themselves. The decision to place him in that suit came from the jail's mental health and safety protocols, especially considering the behavior officers had witnessed during the Columbus standoff. It signaled that the facility was treating him as someone who required close monitoring, not only because of the charges, but because of his emotional state after the arrest. Meanwhile, investigators continued gathering evidence beyond what had already put him in handcuffs. They executed a search warrant at the home of his cousin, seizing devices, GPS data, and other items they believed might clarify the timeline. They also pulled phone records that contradicted earlier statements made by Darnell's mother about when she last had contact with him, which suggested that she may have known more than she initially said. And while Dorothy had repeatedly stated that she and Kaymani lived alone, police uncovered calls linked to Lisa White, the woman who sometimes stayed in the home and watched Kaymani, even though she claimed she wasn't there the night the girl disappeared. These developments surfaced quickly and were still unfolding when the case entered the court system, which meant the investigation continued to widen even as attorneys prepared for trial. And every new piece of information hinted that the story around Kaymani's final moments might be more complicated than anyone first understood. After investigators finished their work inside the abandoned house on Chase Street, the city moved quickly to erase the place where the community's heartbreak had begun. The property had already been marked for demolition, but officials accelerated the timeline because people couldn't bear to pass the house knowing what had happened there. So crews prepared the site, and volunteers came together to save everything the neighborhood had left for Kaymani, every candle, every stuffed toy, every folded note. They carried the memorial piece by piece to a safer spot nearby. The move took almost 2 hours, and when they finished, the new memorial stood taller than the first. Then something unsettling happened. The house caught fire again before crews could tear it down. Officials didn't immediately know how it started, but they suspected arson. At the new memorial site, people used spray paint to say what they felt the city had failed to say earlier. Words like, "Her life mattered," "You let them silence her," and "CSB, where's your accountability?" covered the walls. As the city prepared to lay Kaymani to rest, another dispute surfaced. Both Tiara and Dorothy believed they should be the one to decide her funeral arrangements, and a court had to intervene because their tension had grown the way grief often does, quiet at first, then overwhelming. The judge granted Dorothy the right to oversee the service because Kaymani had lived with her for more than 5 years. Donations the public had given were transferred from one funeral home to another as the details shifted, but people continued giving because they wanted to do something, anything, that felt helpful in a moment when no one knew. In the end, Kaymani's story didn't fade into the background the way so many stories do. As 2025 ended, Kei'Mani Latigue's case was still unfinished. Her father, Darnell Jones, faced 15 serious charges, and the judge kept the death penalty specifications in place. His attorneys signaled they would argue he has a serious mental illness, a claim that could change what the trial looks like when it begins in 2026. For now, he remains held without bond, and the legal process continues to move slowly through motions, hearings, and evaluations. And even though the trial is still ahead, one thing is already clear: Kei'Mani Latigue will not be forgotten. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping true crime stories.